Welcome to Vacuum Wars. Last week I released a best floor cleaner video where for the first time I tested how fast the brush rolls on vacuums spin using a digital tachometer. And I wanted to find out if this is a test I should be using for all the vacuum reviews I do in the future. But in order to know if the speed in which a brush on a vacuum spins makes a difference to its actual performance, I needed to get more data. So this week I took over 60 corded and cordless vacuums that I own and I tested them in the same way and compared those numbers with other performance data I have to see if there was a correlation between the brush speed and performance, and I think the results were pretty interesting. Brush rolls are mostly for carpet agitation. They're sometimes called beater bars because they sort of beat the carpet to reveal the particles which are then sucked up. Carpet agitation isn't the only factor with carpet cleaning performance though. Airflow, suction power, the stiffness of the bristles, and the overall floor head design all play a role as well, so keep that in mind as we progress. As far as the testing itself, I used a mid-range laser tachometer and reflective tape, which I standardized at the same width. I got pretty consistent results throughout the testing. For example, when comparing the results of vacuums that I know to be very similar with the same basic components, like the Dyson upright vacuums or the Shark Navigator 300 series, they were all very similar to one another within just a few RPMs. So, though my numbers might not be the true official RPM of a given vacuum because of some peculiarity with my testing methods, I am at least confident that because of the standardization, they are at least internally consistent enough for me to see the relative differences from one roller to another. The other metric I compared these results to was the carpet deep clean test numbers, where I embed sand into medium pile carpet and weigh the bends before and after a set number of timed passes, which I think is the most logical metric to compare the RPM numbers with to see any performance differences with carpet cleaning. Let's start with the cordless vacuum results, and here there was a lot of variation in brush speed, from about 1000 RPMs on the low side to 4500 on the high side. And I found that there did not seem to be a correlation between the faster spinning brushes and 100% deep clean scores. For example, the Hoover React had the highest RPMs of any that I tested, but it had a relatively low deep clean score. I saw the same basic thing with the Dyson V8, and especially with the Musu 618B, which had almost 4000 RPMs, but one of the lowest scores on the deep clean test. However, there did seem to be a negative correlation, meaning that those cordless vacuums with the slowest brush speeds had the worst deep clean scores. In fact, of the 20 or so cordless vacuums with RPMs lower than 3000 RPMs, there wasn't a single 100% score among them. This, of course, isn't to say that RPMs are the only factor. In fact, I think that airflow at the head is an even better predictor of good scores on the deep clean test, but it does help to form a hypothesis that we can test. Moving on to corded upright vacuums, and here there were some additional factors to consider. For example, corded vacuums almost universally have more suction and airflow power than cordless vacuums, so they tend to get 100% scores on this test more frequently. Also, there were fewer brush rolls that spun slowly with corded vacuums. In fact, of the 30 or so I tested, there were only 3 under 3000 RPMs, and 2 of those were just barely under 3000. So while I didn't see the same kind of negative correlation that I saw with cordless vacuums, it was presumably because none of them had RPMs in the 1000 to 2000 range. But I did see an interesting trend at the other end of the spectrum, which was that first, those corded vacuums with the fastest brush speeds were really fast, almost double the speed of the fastest cordless vacuums at 6,000 and 7,000 RPMs. But interestingly, those vacuums with super fast brushes were mostly cheaper or older style vacuums that in many cases did really poorly on the deep clean test. So you could say that RPMs in the 6,000 or 7,000 range were correlated with bad carpet cleaning scores, but correlation does not necessarily imply causation, because the truth probably is that the faster brush speeds are just a byproduct of the vacuum being a bad vacuum in the first place. This is because older style and cheaper vacuums often connected a belt to the suction motor directly, so the brush is spinning at more or less the same speed as the motor, whereas newer style vacuums tend to have a dedicated motor just for spinning the brush roll, which is the case with every cordless vacuum I tested, for example. So all of this led to the 4 following tentative conclusions. Number 1, vacuums with rollers spinning at very low speeds, from 1000 to 2000 RPM say, are likely not to be very good with with deep cleaning carpets unless they have some other factor that overcomes that limitation, such as very high airflow or a very well-designed floor head. Number 2, the brush rolls on cheaper corded vacuums are mostly driven directly by their suction motors to save costs, which gives them higher RPMs. Therefore, it's difficult to say that high RPMs are the main factor for their poor performance, since they also usually have less suction and airflow because they are generally of a lower quality overall anyway. Number 3, it seems to me that when premium manufacturers design independent brush roll motors, they're typically dialing them in between 3,000 and 4,500 RPMs, and it's my guess that there isn't much of a reason to go higher than that. So 3,000 to 4,500 is probably a kind of sweet spot for vacuum RPMs. And number 4, based on all this, I would predict a very strong correlation between RPMs and carpet performance with robot vacuums, because like cordless vacuums, they are not driven by suction motors. And there is much more of a variation in robot vacuum deep clean scores, so it should be a more dramatic test. The only reason I didn't do that for this video is that testing RPMs on robot vacuums is a lot more logistically complex and will take several weeks to go through all of them, but it is something I plan to do. Thanks for sticking around for this particularly dense episode of Vacuum Wars, and be sure to subscribe before you leave. Thanks for watching.